I'm honored to serve as the co-chair of this committee along with New Mexico Secretary of State and current NASS President Maggie Toles Oliver. I want to welcome our new members to the NASS Cybersecurity Committee. Because of the importance of cybersecurity for all Secretaries of State, all NASS members are on the committee. Now, because we don't have any formal committee business on the agenda, we want to move right into our program. First, I'd like to ask Lindsay Forston, our NASS staff liaison for this committee, to make a couple of quick announcements.
Good afternoon, everyone. I will be very quick. I just want, I sent an email about this about a month ago. I just want to make sure it's on everyone's radar. NASS had been tracking the .gov Act, a federal legislation. It was a piece of legislation that would make availability, it would put in federal statute the availability of the .gov domain for state, local, tribal, and territorial governments, also move the administration of .gov to CISA. And one of the key elements of this is that it gives CISA flexibility to reduce or eliminate fees for using .gov in some cases or altogether. We're not sure exactly how they will set that up, but I've received feedback from several NASS offices over the years that we've been tracking this related to fees for small local jurisdictions. And so I really just want it on your radar that that bill was part of the omnibus spending bill. And so it is, the .gov administration is moving to CISA. There will be some changes in implementation and potentially changes in fees. And NASS will be working with CISA on getting you all the implementation information and also providing secretaries opportunities to provide input on implementation plans. The one other thing we will be tracking with CISA is the implementation of new cybersecurity state coordinators. And this was part of the National Defense Authorization Act. And this will be in addition to your regional cybersecurity advisors. So they're not going away. But it's something, we don't have a lot of details on yet, but it's something that we're looking at, and we will keep you apprised of implementation plans on that as well. Just the general administrative stuff for this meeting. Please make sure that you're on mute when you're not speaking. Please turn your video on if you're so inclined. We appreciate having the videos on. And just a reminder to everyone that this session is open to the media and a recording will be posted to the NASS website at a later date. Secretary Pate, back to you.
Just trying to make sure I had the mute off. I'm pleased to moderate our first panel discussion, Secretary of State collaboration with cybersecurity researchers. I want to thank you to our panelists for joining us today. We have Trevor Timmons, the CIO for the Colorado Secretary of State's office, along with Mike Kerr representing CENAC, one of Colorado's private sector partners from 2020. I'm pleased to be joined by Jeff Franklin from my office, our Chief Cyber Officer, along with Casey Ellis from one of our private sector partners, BugCrowd. And finally, we have Sean sorry about that, Sean. Sean McAfee from CISO for the Ohio Secretary of State's office, along with Martin, I'm going to do this for you. Is it Mikoso? Did I get it right? Okay, it's all thumbs up. Of HackerOne, one of Ohio's private sector partners. We're going to discuss a couple of options available to offices of Secretaries of State for collaboration with cybersecurity researchers, and we're going to highlight some of the examples from 2020. I'd like to start out with Mark. If he would give us some of the basics, could you please kind of briefly explain what a cybersecurity researcher, also known as an ethical hacker or a white hat hacker, is and how they can help us?
Hi, everyone. My name is Mark Poor. I'm the co-founder and CTO here at CENAC. I'll start out by defining what a researcher is. So a researcher is someone who's very knowledgeable about the cybersecurity space, who's capable of finding vulnerabilities and wants to help. They want to help you secure your systems. And the folks on this panel from CENAC, HackerOne, and BugCrowd all have built a platform to help you leverage the talent that is out there, let you tap into a global talent pool that is ready and willing to help you secure your systems. These guys are ethical, they're well-trained, they know what to look for, and they can help us prevent adversaries from taking advantage of vulnerabilities that may be lurking around our systems.
And my name's Trevor Timmons. I'm from the state of Colorado. Thank you, Secretary Payton, Secretary Toulouse-Oliver. The bottom lining it, penetration tests are good. I mean, the fact of the matter is random people are testing your web-facing assets every single day. When you hire a commercial company to do penetration testing, usually they will bring in a number of resources. If you're hiring a commercial party, you may have 2 or 3. If you're working with CISA on a risk and vulnerability assessment or remote pen test, you may have 5, 6, or 7 individuals that are doing some of that penetration testing and that vulnerability testing work. But though you only are obtaining results based on the skill sets of those individuals that are hired and are actually doing that work against your systems. And that's one of the reasons that in our office, we reached out to CINAC to try to broaden, it's one of the strategies that you'll hear about today to broaden the skill sets of people that are testing your systems. CINAC's engagement with the state of Colorado actually revealed a flaw in our implementation of a CAPTCHA. A CAPTCHA is a technology that's used to deter bots or programmatic means of actually accessing systems. And they detected a flaw in the way that we'd implemented CAPTCHA in our online voter registration lookup. It was fabulous work on their part. We worked with them far enough ahead of peak election periods that we were able to correct that flaw and then reach to CINAC to have them retest our corrections to that way before our peak election periods. Mark, maybe you can describe a little bit about the CINAC model.
Yeah, absolutely. So my co-founder and I came out of the National Security Agency, and the idea of CINAC at its core was to recreate some of what we were doing for the U.S. government. On the U.S. government side of things, we were basically hackers for the government, taking an offensive stance against adversaries. And as everybody has now heard about from 2016 election and recent SolarWinds breaches, there are adversaries out there that have similar capabilities that do want to take advantage of our vulnerabilities. So the idea of CINAC was to allow both government entities and commercial ones to tap into that global talent pool, bring those researchers in, and harness them in a way that allows us to come close to what a nation state could do from a capability standpoint. So as Trevor said, in normal penetration tests, you get a couple consultants showing up at your door, and they're going to put in, whatever you pay them to do on an hourly basis, 40, 80 hours, whatever it may be. And it's way different on a crowdsourced platform like CINAC, because we're going to go vet out hundreds of researchers. We make sure they know what they're doing by verifying their skills. And we're only taking in kind of the top 10% of talent. Then we bring them onto a software platform to control the testing and deploy them at scale across the infrastructure that's under test. And so, in comparison, I'm dropping 100, 200 researchers onto a test and incentivizing them to find the most damaging vulnerabilities possible in the fastest period of time. Whereas a traditional pen test, you're not necessarily motivated to find any vulnerabilities. You're going to get paid either way. So the model is dramatically different in that regard, but I'd say it's very important, especially with U.S. government systems, and we work with the Pentagon quite a bit as well, but it's very important to vet the researchers out and make sure you're working with the right folks, make sure they have the right skills and trust level that you need. And then, as Trevor said, do this in such a private way that you can fix the issues in advance, in private, without making that data public, because ideally we don't want other adversaries to figure out the flaw with the CAPTCHA issue, right? We want to fix that first and stay with you guys through the find and fix process. So the model that we typically see is one of continuous deployment, where we don't expect that your infrastructure is static. We don't expect that your application stack is remaining the same day to day, and there are new vulnerabilities coming out every single day. So the idea is that we set this up and we run it continuously for a year, and we're monitoring for changes with automation. We're finding where new services are popping up. We're finding where new vulnerabilities may be located. And we're continuously deploying new researchers against the attack surface so that we're there as a constant pressure force to find vulnerabilities ahead of the adversary. That's really the model that makes this work. And otherwise, a point-in-time test just leaves you vulnerable in those periods of idleness. So this allows you to move to a model that's more continuous, that fits your development team's work, fits the constant change that's happening across your apps and infrastructure. And we find that that's the most successful way to increase your attacker resistance, as we refer to it. We want to raise the cost of a breach to the adversary so that they spend their time elsewhere.
Hey, thank you, Mark. We're going to hear of a couple other models for identifying vulnerabilities and working with researchers to identify those. Really appreciate the opportunity. Lindsay, back to you.
Oh, thank you. I'll take it, Mark. Thank you both. And now let's take a look at what we're doing in Iowa and what the Ohio Secretary of State's office is working on. Both offices launched vulnerability disclosure programs in 2020. Casey, could you briefly describe what coordinated vulnerability disclosure is and how it benefits both the cybersecurity researchers and to protect themselves from cyber threats?
Certainly, yeah, and thank you for having me on. So BugCrowd, just by way of brief background, we basically pioneered this model back in 2012. We were the first to launch programs out into the public, and I think the easiest way to describe what a vulnerability disclosure program is in context of Mark and Trevor's introduction, it has all of the same mechanics. There's the systems that you're wanting security feedback on. There's systems that get the information from A to B, and then there's contributors of that security feedback. Really, the difference is it kind of reflects back on what Trevor mentioned about the idea that people are looking at this stuff anyway, whether or not you invite them to. And BugCrowd runs private programs where there's invites and it looks more controlled and similar to what Mark mentioned. VDP or vulnerability disclosure programs, really what that's about is acknowledging that security feedback can come from anywhere. It's like neighborhood watch for your IT assets. If white hat researchers, hackers, anyone else for that matter, sees something, they have a clear way to say something. I think the value of that is twofold. You're really opening up your opportunity for input on security feedback to a far broader audience, which in the use case that we're talking about is a very broad audience. We're talking about effectively the entire population of the United States that are in scope interested in interacting with these systems. So it's a fit from that perspective, on top of the private stuff being a good approach as well. I think the thing that we saw be most powerful, and one of the reasons we got involved in some of the work that the House Rules Committee and others were doing back in 2017, 2018, is that when you talk about the kind of confidence that's required in the average voter of all of these computer systems that are being used to power the democratic process, it's a really easy security control to actually explain to a layperson. If there's doubt or dispersion cast on the integrity of those systems, this is one of those things that you can point to and say, okay, here's like neighborhood watch for the internet. You understand that in your home. This is the digital equivalent. This is part of what we're doing, and do that in a way that fundamentally props up confidence in those systems. For the security researchers, they love it. I think really the thing for those folk is that they're curious, they're very passionate people, they want to help. Many of them are deeply patriotic. Jack Cable, who works for CISA now, some of you may know, is a good example of one of the people that's actually contributing on that side.
Thank you, Casey, very much. Martin, an important goal for Secretary of State is promoting that public confidence in our IT systems. Could you please elaborate on how collaborating with cybersecurity researchers and particularly the vulnerability disclosure program can help us promote that confidence?
My pleasure. And thank you, NASS, for inviting me to address you today. Hats off to all the states who already have established vulnerability disclosure programs. My name is Martin Mikkos, and I'm the CEO of HackerOne. To the question then, there's just one way to build confidence, and it is through transparency and consistent action. So by inviting friendly hackers to hack, the organization demonstrates their seriousness about cybersecurity. They show they have nothing to hide and will be taking action. And this is exactly what the public has been expecting and hoping for. Confidence in the state will grow. And here I use the term friendly hacker to mean security researcher, white hat hacker. There are many names for these wonderful, well-intended individuals. We already have terrific examples of this model in the private sector. Companies such as Starbucks, Hyatt Hotels, General Motors, Goldman Sachs, credit card companies, and so on. These organizations build trust with consumers by operating vulnerability disclosure programs, VDPs. And additionally, a VDP will build confidence inside the organization, where staff often may be resigned in the front of the massive challenges of cybersecurity. But with a VDP, those working on the inside will know that they be helped by friendly hackers on the outside. It brings hope and a path forward. For each vulnerability found and fixed, cybersecurity risk goes down a little bit. Progress is steady, and this is perfectly doable for any organization. If we look at the world's largest vulnerability disclosure program, it is the one of the Department of Defense. They have already found and fixed over 25,000 security holes in their publicly facing computer systems. 25,000. And before the program started 5 years ago, 4 years ago, 5 years ago, yes, many doubted it could even be done. Now, with facts in hand, we know it's one of the most successful initiatives worldwide at reducing the risk of cyber breach. And now, to celebrate the success, the Pentagon is even expanding it and offering the same service to their vendors in the private sector, because they know that we are not and they cannot be fully secure until everyone is secure. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. I appreciate those comments. Next, I'd like to ask Jeff Franklin, who's with my office and is our cybersecurity guru and security expert. Jeff, do you want to talk briefly about the implementation of the vulnerability disclosure program that we launched in Iowa? I'll turn it over to you.
Of course. Thank you, sir. I think, the first thing I'd like to say is, I've been doing vulnerability management programs for nearly a decade. And so if you aren't doing, if you're not already taking care of vulnerabilities in your systems in a systematic way, you need to do that. Vulnerabilities are coming out every single day, and they're always new. There's numerous technologies out there that need to be addressed. Every time software is imperfect, humans are imperfect that write it. So this is, to me, the next evolutionary step in making sure that you have a vulnerability program, a vulnerability management program that makes sense. So you have to ask yourself why. And I think the decision to move forward is based on a lot of things that folks have said here today. And so for us, we had tested our systems with the National Guard and state employees and private sector and all of the feds, and all those folks are, very qualified at what they do. They do a good job. And I think we reached that point in our maturity and our cybersecurity maturity of our program is we really were looking for someone who thinks about this differently. We know that security researchers think differently. They approach things with a different perspective. And then the vulnerability management or disclosure programs, they're incentivized to find those. And so we believe that they dig deeper. And so they look around the corner and they look they look in places that normal pen testers might not. So for us, it was, we know they approach it different. Also, what you're getting is this diverse set of skills and expertise that you're never going to build in-house or pay for. So for us to go hire 100 security researchers that are experts in web security and server security and network security and all those things, it's just not feasible. And so you really do need someone to broker this service for you. And so our implementation, we looked at like we do on all products, but we looked at vendors in the marketplace to see who could broker this for us and what service do we need them to do. And so things like we knew that we wanted a mechanism for people to report vulnerabilities in a responsible fashion. So whether you're a security researcher and you happen across it, or you deliberately find a vulnerability in our system, we wanted an approach where that information, there was an intake process. And so the broker, in our case, BugCrowd, will take that and digest that information. We also wanted to make sure that the vulnerabilities were legitimate. So there's a testing process that we're not going to be able to do if they find a vulnerability, that we want them to determine if it's legitimate or not. And then once they do determine that, process that up to us. And so we can take a look at it, we can fix the problem. And then even more important for us is coming back with the retesting of that vulnerability to make sure that we've come full circle and that it's been resolved. So those are some of the things that we were looking for. We kind of approached this from a crawl, walk, run type model. Before we just launched and announced ourselves as we want everybody to take a look at our systems and find weaknesses. We did a soft launch, and so we asked them to find researchers that were targeting specific to our systems that were a good fit for us, to look at our systems. We had an opportunity to fix those vulnerabilities that were found immediately, and then we posted the fact that we have a vulnerability management program in place, and it's not a free-for-all. We have a policy out there. It has guardrails, and it requires that they can do certain types of attacks and certain things they can't do to prove that it's a legitimate type vulnerability. So it is important for us, and like what's been mentioned, is that you already have researchers out there that are going after systems no matter what, and so you might as well put in a program that makes sense and that puts those guardrails in a process for positive feedback. So those are a few of our implementation ideas and things that we did. We have, we've had several submissions. We've resolved them. And Casey, the guy with the coolest background on the call, I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, sir. Yeah, I mean that was really well said. I think the fundamental idea that we're trying to activate here as we think about this type of model is that our job is to outsmart not only the adversary but our own teams that are building stuff. They're creatively powerful and they do awesome work, but they're also human, which means that there are going to be mistakes made, some of which will turn into vulnerabilities. So it really becomes a matter of getting enough diversity and capacity of human creativity to try to identify where those issues might exist, so that you can rationally work your way through mitigating them and reducing your risk over time. I think the piece that is a really important call out from Jeff's kind of description of the program is just that it's not one size fits all. Like that's really a lot of what BugCrowd's approach has been from the get-go, is to take this overall model of this incredible resource that is out there and available and wanting to help, curate it, but then apply it into all of the different use cases that apply in reflection of where you might be up to as a state, as an organization. We do this in the private sector and all other places as well. And it really comes down to a partnership to understand what that journey looks like, that crawl, walk, run. If you're just getting started, okay, what are the steps that are needing to be taken that are rational and safe? Get everything moving to the next step, and you just kind of iterate forward until you feel like your program's fully mature and doing all the things you want it to. So I think that's really all I would say about that, other than to just encourage folk as well to be thinking about this from the policy standpoint. When you look at NIST 853R5, you look at some of the stuff in Binding Operational Directive 2001. Some of the things that are happening from a DOJ standpoint when it comes to safe harbor and actual protection for people that are identifying issues and trying to be helpful. That's the aspect of this that's it's got a 30-year history of not being done all that well, and it's really cool to see people leaning into that. So that's just something to keep in mind.
Thank you, Casey and Jeff. Now let's look at another example. Sean, this past summer, the Ohio Secretary of State's office became the first state elections office to launch a vulnerability disclosure program. Could you please add Ohio's perspective on what you were doing when you're working with HackerOne and Ohio Secretary of State's office?
Thank you, Secretary Pate. It's wonderful to be here. There's a great crew around us, and it's great to be part of that. At the Ohio Secretary of State, we've been very forward-leaning in cybersecurity. Secretary LaRose has pushed really hard to get our organization into a better security posture overall, and has encouraged ways to maximize transparency. So that goes without saying. The crew is trying to. Everyone here is kind of in the same fight every day. So on our endeavor, we went down the path to open our doors to the researcher community through the Ohio Secretary of State's Vulnerability Disclosure Program. That policy is on our website. It's very similar to what I was mentioning, and that's been active now for a few months, as we all know. For us, we have since then partnered with HackerOne, which has given us the platform and the service to allow our organization to mature that policy and also the processes that go along with it. Iowa did a great job of just mentioning what those inner workings look like, everything from triage to, finding if it's a legitimate finding and how we actually can action that, with our staff size. So that was really kind of the push to find the right platform for us. And for us, it's enabled us to take our policy at a much faster pace and provide us access to very, very talented community of security researchers. Now, Mr. Ellis actually took one of my talking points, which is awesome. So this is maybe more of a household name than some will get credit for. But here we have Jack Cable and another gentleman named Sam Curry, who are top researchers. They're they're globally recognized, at least nationally recognized. And those I'm not sure what just happened there. I'm hearing a little interference, but for those two, those are just two samples of researchers we had in our with us on kind of our journey, and it's really put us in good hands. There will always be misses. There will always be things that internally we might not have our hands wrapped around, and having that reassurance that those researchers are out there every day, picking those up and putting it forward for us to take action on internally. That goes without saying. That's a big win for everybody. So on the lead up to the election, we had a handful of findings that came to us through our HackerOne platform. Again, maturing that and getting those in and getting those at speed, and knowing that they were legitimate allowed us to figure out how to best execute on that and get those mitigated in time. So that was a big win for us. It was for us too. It was a controlled release. And that enabled those particular hackers and researchers to assist us there in a way that we knew what we were getting. And there were a couple findings that were certainly very helpful for us to understand prior to even the lead up to election. One of the bigger points too, and I think it's been hit on, talent at this scale and magnitude doesn't come easy at the local market. I think we can all attest to that. And trying to scale to have those resources on hand with the budget constraints we're under was certainly another reason why we looked to go down this path. It allows us, working with HackerOne, to lean into the problem aggressively. We're able to find common vulnerability and misconfigurations. And I hate to use this term, but I like it because I come from it, but we're really looking just to get a defense in depth posture that we need at a local level. So we've been thrilled with the start of our vulnerability disclosure program to date. We know that there's still work to be done, even internally. But as everyone here, we're protecting elections. And, for me, it's always a speech that I throw out there is for those researchers that are inclined to assist in protecting our elections, this platform allows us to collaborate with them. And we certainly look forward to working with them to protect our systems. That's all I have today.
Thank you. Appreciate it. We have a little bit of time for some questions, and I want to thank the panel. We could spend a lot of time chatting about this, but I'm going to turn it over to our staff here, Lindsay, to moderate. And I'll just encourage you can always reach out to NASS, and we'll get you in contact with any of the panel members to try and answer your questions too. Lindsay?
Secretary Toulouse-Oliver, do you want to ask your question?
Sure. Well, I asked it in the chat, but I'll give Merton a chance to answer for everybody. So, I was really intrigued. I think as election officials, one of the things that we're really focused on right now is this concept of trust in our election process. And you made the comment that, the the public vulnerability testing and the white hat hacking can lead to confidence in, or building trust and confidence in election systems. And so my question to you in the chat was, what sort of research is out there to kind of fortify that assertion? And I'll let you respond. Thanks.
Thank you, Maggie. Great question. I stated that the only way to build trust is through transparency, and I stand for that. But it doesn't mean that when we build systems and test them, that we shouldn't apply private and closed tests and groups. And we should absolutely do that. So security starts from the inside, but it must be validated from the outside always. And we will never get there until it has the public scrutiny of anybody out there, like a Jack Cable, who, when he was 17, he was a high school kid from Chicago. He participated in our program called Hack the Air Force. We were hacking the Air Force at the time. He found 20 holes in the Air Force. He was 17 years old. And now he have gone on to hacker fame. So, and that could not be possible if the invitation weren't open to everybody. But there's a lot of preparation to do there. You can do the retesting in private. You can run private programs. You can apply your own small testing. There are all these ways of getting there. But the ultimate trust with the citizens or whoever you are working with, the constituents you're working with, only comes through transparency at the end of the day. You can take baby steps there, but if you are not heading that way, it won't work. And the Department of Defense has now showed it. You would think that they might be the most conservative, most closed, the most secretive organization in the world. They love the hackers, and they allow now hackers from all over the world to participate. And it's benefiting the DoD and the whole United States in that bugs are found and fixed much faster than in any other way. So transparency must be your ultimate goal. But there are many ways to get there, and we all have who'd work with this. We have different services for different needs.
If I could add to that briefly, it's, when you look at Facebook, Google, DoD in Martin's example, like some of these organizations that have not only done this, but actually gone out and really kind of taken a bit of a counterintuitive step to tell the world that they're not perfect, and that they're asking for and wanting help. We're at a point where I think there's enough track record with the tech company examples where that's actually equated to trustworthiness in the form of like, okay, y'all are mature. You've got a mature approach to security. We understand what you're doing. That makes me more confident as a user. And I think, Google and Facebook are a little bit different to a state in a lot of ways, but I think that same directional principle applies in terms of what can be achieved around democracy.
Does anyone else want to weigh in on this? Okay, great. Another question I received is it possible to incorporate something like these testing solutions into the development stage of systems that aren't fully public facing yet? And I'll open it up to whoever wants to start. Go ahead, Martin.
Happy to start. I'm again Martin from HackerOne. You can absolutely apply the learnings in the software development lifecycle, and that's what good vulnerability disclosure programs and bug bounty programs will do. The findings you do, you go back and do the root cause analysis, and you try to make sure that you never produce the same vulnerability again by picking different software libraries, different coding practices, by not using certain features of a programming language or configuration. There's a lot of learnings to do there. But the essence of what we call hacker-powered security is to test from the outside and start to test the production system for a very specific reason. There are vulnerabilities in your systems that were not bugs while the code was developed. Security vulnerabilities have many causes, and not all of them are software bugs. So you should absolutely try to avoid all the software bugs, but that's no guarantee that there won't be vulnerabilities. So you must always test the final work product, the final code that's out there in a website or a mobile application or an API or some other system.
Yeah, I would add to that just in terms of, this is where curation comes in as well, because completely agree with what Martin's saying. Like, production is where it matters most. looking at the steps that can be taken and where testing can be done before something reaches production. That's really where it comes down to, you know, understanding the skills of the researchers that you're inviting, understanding to what degree you feel like you can trust them. You know, are they professional? Have they passed background checking? All those sorts of things. If you're letting people in behind the wire, so to speak, or giving them access to information that you wouldn't, you know, necessarily put out to the public, then you want to make sure that you can answer that question fairly confidently. And I think there are things that, you know, BugCrowd's put together from a skill vetting standpoint and a trust vetting standpoint in the crowd, but also to allow for access into those systems that might not necessarily be accessible through the public internet.
Yeah, I think that's, you know, I agree with what everybody's saying as well. This is Mark from CINAC. You know, a concrete example is all these COVID apps that we're launching last year. You know, we were working with HHS to test those things in development before, you know, consumers got their hands on them. And that's exactly the way it should be. And kind of this, somebody else said it, you know, crawl, walk, run approach is so key. If you can actually do this testing privately first, find as many vulnerabilities as possible in development before it goes to production, that's probably the best way to ensure you don't have really damaging vulnerabilities make it all the way to production, which can lead to that question of trust that we were just talking about. So we do want to limit the amount of damaging things that make it to production. So I'm a big fan of doing this as early in the cycle as possible, especially when we're handling, you know, PII, consumer information, health information, voter registration databases, things like that. So absolutely need to make sure that you're working that into the development cycle. You're connecting your non-production environments to platforms to enable testing, and making sure your developers are heavily involved in the process so they don't make the same mistakes again.
Thanks, Mark. We're just about out of time on this panel, but I want to prioritize the secretaries. Secretary Gorbea has a question, and panelists, feel free to engage in the chat. I know there were a couple of other.
So this is more sort of a macro structural question, because I find it really interesting how every state is developing different structures to fund and operate this. So for example, in Rhode Island, we've been giving some grants for security purposes down to the locals. We can do that in a state like Rhode Island. I know in other states, it's the counties that are doing stuff. I think this is more sort of a call to NASS to gather some of that information in terms of how states are doing this, because I do believe that we've done a lot of strengthening at the state level, but it's the local levels that are really, really of concern. That's not to say they couldn't do more. Clearly, today's panel points on some really good directions, but it would be interesting to see, you know, if some of the federal dollars are being carved out for the locals, or how is this going to evolve? Because it's almost like a whole other new need in government that we need to account for and structure for.
Does anyone have any thoughts on that?
I'll just plug in that, you know, we are trying to do that in Iowa, and I think several states are doing it. But the real focus of, I think, what the secretary is pointing out is we need to perhaps, as a state, share some of that knowledge that we're getting from the counties or the local governments, because I think we all will acknowledge that our weakest point is sometimes our local government, because they don't have the resources to do it all. We have very small offices and limited cyber experts. So we really have, you know, doubled down and tripled down in our efforts to work with our local jurisdictions. That's part of what Jeff's job is. My IT people is to pass those resources on. So your suggestion is right on, Nellie. We've got to kind of share some of that knowledge.
Thanks, Secretary Gorbea, and I'm happy to chat with you and your team about how we can help with that.
Just in case you didn't have enough to do, Lindsay.
I'm always happy to help. Okay, well, that was perfect timing. Way to go, Secretary Pate. At this point, we'll move it, and thank you to all the panelists. We'll move it on to Secretary Toulouse-Oliver for our second panel discussion.
And this is the worst possible timing because I have a kiddo trying to get out the door. So I'm going to try to do two things at once here and hope everybody, there's the doorbell, will just bear with me for a moment. So I just first of all want to say thank you so much to our panel. Really appreciate the interesting insight. Has just brought up a lot of questions for me. I was just finishing putting another question in the chat to you all. So if you're hanging around, and look forward to continuing that conversation. I am New Mexico Secretary of State Maggie Toulouse Oliver. I am excited about this next panel discussion on the future of cybersecurity for state and local government. As you all know, 2020 was a challenging year in so many ways. Check your backpack. In so many ways, and cybersecurity was, of course, no exception, as it has not been for quite a while now. We saw ransomware attacks on state and local government, a large-scale supply chain cyber attack impacting the federal government and U.S. industry, and more. Let's take this opportunity to take what we've learned over the past 4 years of cybersecurity challenges to look ahead toward how we can overcome obstacles and improve our cybersecurity postures. Thank you to our esteemed panelists for joining us today. So first and foremost, I'm pleased to welcome U.S. Congressman Jim Langevin, who represents Rhode Island's 2nd District and serves as co-chair of the Congressional Cybersecurity Caucus, served on the Cyberspace Solarium Commission, and perhaps most importantly, is a NASS alum. Then we have Mr. Frank Salufo. You'll correct me if I'm mispronouncing any of your names. The director of Auburn University's McCrary Institute for Cyber and Critical Infrastructure Security, who has extensive homeland security and cybersecurity experience inside and outside of government, and also served on the Cyberspace Solarium Commission. And last but certainly not least, someone very familiar to us, Ms. Cynthia Kaiser, the section chief for the FBI's Cyber Division. Cynthia has covered technology and counterintelligence issues for the FBI for over 15 years. And we are very pleased to have such a range of perspectives and expertise. And we're grateful to each of you for joining me in this discussion. So let's begin with a look at the challenge ahead. What do each of you think will be the greatest cybersecurity related challenge for state and local entities during the next few years? And if we could start with, let's say with Frank, please.
Well, thank you, Secretary Toulouse Oliver, and thank you all for the opportunity to share some thoughts. I think we all owe our state secretaries a debt of gratitude, and cyber clearly was front and center this year. So thank you for that. And I think that the answer to your first question is building on some of the work that you've done. As we know, technology changes. With that come new vulnerabilities, but human nature remains consistent. And at the end of the day, whether it's good or bad behavior, whatever is happening in the real world has an analog in the cyber world, and you're starting to see a convergence of both of those worlds. And I think one of the big takeaways from my perspective is, and this you can say the same about all security issues, it's not an end state. It's really a journey. And when you look at cybersecurity, trust and confidence in our systems is paramount. That's rule number one, and we need to continue to double down our efforts in that respect. I think from a ransomware perspective, you're going to continue to see more and more, unfortunately, newer forms, newer variants, and unfortunately, the baseline in terms of our capabilities to respond is wanting at this point. I also think, though, that the SolarWinds hack really demonstrated the importance of our supply chains. And I think it's really important for states and our localities to start doing the inventorying. As horrific of an incident as this was, in many cases, you have foreign nations that actually own elements of our infrastructure, and we need to start taking some of those issues very seriously. So long-winded answer to say it's the relationships that got you to where you needed to be. You got to continue to double down on those relationships. You've got to lash up federal, state, local. And I hate to say it, the stark reality is we can't wait for the cavalry to come. States have a responsibility at the highest levels. Every governor should be assuming this, just like companies that learn the hard way. It's a CEO issue. It can't be relegated to the IT shop. So I went on too long. And the bottom line is doing more with less. I hate to say it, you have the same exposure that the federal government has. but obviously you need support in terms of resources and capabilities to level the playing field as much as possible. So thank you.
Right. That's right. Thank you so much. Congressman Langevin, could you hit that one for us?
Cynthia, thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be back with fellow secretaries of state. Cynthia mentioned in my in the opening there that I served as Rhode Island Secretary of State from 1994 to 2000 before I left to serve in Congress. So a special shout out to all of you, and most especially to my Secretary of State, Nellie Gorbea, who's doing a wonderful job here in Rhode Island, and I appreciate her work and that of her team. So good evening, everyone. I completely agree with what the issues that Frank touched on. The challenge with cybersecurity, of course, it's such a vast attack space that you can pick your venue and your avenue, and significant damage can be caused. So I guess I would touch on, I'll zero in on the two things. First, I believe that as outside foreign powers, particularly Russia, continue to want to undermine our democracy, they're going to continue to focus on trying to sow discord in our elections processes or systems. And if they can get in and just undermine confidence, they will, even if they don't physically get in or do anything. Just the attempt at doing so and creating doubt is something we have to be concerned with. It's a danger. They're going to continue to use certainly social media platforms against us, and exploit our value of love of free speech, and trying to again sow divisions. And so those are things that we are going to have to double down on to build in resilience through better civics education, and also digital literacy, which is going to become increasingly important, so that our voters, our citizens, can really become better at discerning what's truth and what's fiction, and what's sowing discord by a foreign entity. But in terms of the one thing that that is going to be particularly hard for states and companies to deal with is, and Frank touched on it, protecting against ransomware attacks. This is a particular challenge because human vulnerabilities, allowing phishing and other social engineering attacks are extremely difficult to eliminate entirely. And look, there's a huge profit motive here, and proven profitability of conducting ransomware attacks. So it really ensures that there's going to be plenty of criminals out there. They're going to find those vulnerabilities. They're going to try to get their way in and profit from it, which is unfortunate. So state and local governments, again, make particularly attractive targets, and so they're, I know, often under-resourced, and they really perform essential functions, and the disruption of that is felt immediately by the citizens, and they have to react quickly. And in some ways, I think too many entities, unfortunately, have just had to pay the ransom to get their systems back up and running. I would say this: the degree to which you can have backups of your systems and can be confident that you can reboot and reconstitute quickly, that's going to be the best preventative right now. But I think ransomware is going to become a growing and increasing challenge.
Absolutely. You're so right about that, Congressman. Cynthia, what do you think about the next few years?
Well, I think when you're looking at how the COVID-19 pandemic has really changed a lot of the ways we do business, and it's increased the risk aperture that we all have across the internet, we're also seeing our adversaries becoming more dangerous and opportunistic. And that means that we're really looking at a set of activities and actors that we can't predict, and that we have to really try to figure out ways, I think, that we're going to defend against them. And, I think that the congressman brings up a good example of ransomware, and taking that a step further, thinking about managed service providers, and I would call SolarWinds hack part of this kind of managed service provider issue, where managed service providers have a lot of clients, they're IT firms with a lot of clients. In the SolarWinds case, the actors were able to, go in and compromise a wide set of actors, or at least expose them to those compromises. And while we think that that particular attack was done by an advanced persistent threat actor, likely Russian in origin, all of our adversaries are doing it. With ransomware, we've seen the ransomware actors going through the managed service providers so that they can attack a much wider aperture of actors, being able to find and maximize their financial impact in one go. And that's happened a lot at the state and local level. Now, thinking through, the things that we faced in the last even just few months, I can tick through a few of the advisories FBI's put out. So looking at the threat to K-12 educational institutions, and that's threats of ransomware, as well as threats to students and employees, PII, the Iranian threats against us, right? Against election officials, against individuals, U.S. citizens who are, trying to do their job and do it well as trying to undermine confidence in the political system overall through cyber-enabled influence operations. Russia targeting state and local governments through common vulnerabilities that we may see, or even ransomware actors targeting hospitals and COVID-19 research at a time when you'd think that would be against the line. So, I think I often get accused in my briefings of sounding like a little bit of a parade of horribles, and certainly that's, I think, what American citizens pay me to do. But really, all this, I think, brings to bear what I think the greatest challenge is that we need to figure out ways to make actors believe that there's risks to compromising our networks, to trying to hold our critical infrastructure hostage, to stealing our intellectual or property or financial means. And the only way to do that is to work together. There's no single agency or state or nation that's going to be able to impose risks and consequences on our actors the way we can if we all work together. And so looking forward, I think the challenge for all of us is to figure out ways at not just our level, but at every level through all parts of our organizations to be closely lashed up, working together and thinking about not just remediating some of the compromises, but like how do we make it and increase the cost on actors to do that in the first place.
Agree with you there, Cynthia. So for our next two questions, and in the interest of time, I'm going to address the next question specifically to Frank because I think that the question following that, I'll want to switch things around a little bit. So our next question, looking toward the near-term future, what do you think will be our most challenging adversary in cyberspace and why? And I think we heard, from Congressman Langevin, the ransomware sort of malware sort of challenge from Cynthia, the Iranians and these, specific foreign actors. Frank, do you have a specific thought on that front?
Frank, you're on mute.
You're still muted.
Proverbial mute. I apologize.
Proverbial.
I just sang all of your praises. So, no, in all sincerity, I think that both Congressman Langevin and Cynthia answered that well. But let me just say a couple of quick points to add a little bit to that discussion. Firstly, not all hacks are the same, nor are all hackers. Intentions vary, capabilities vary, the tactics, techniques, and procedures they use vary, as do the tools. So at the end of the day, the threat spectrum includes a wide variant of actors. At the very top of the list are advanced persistent threats. Think China, think Russia. Then just beneath them, countries that may not have the same capability as Russia and China, unfortunately have a lot of intent. So what they lack in capability, they make up for with intent, and they can cause some disruptive behavior. Think of a drive-by shooting sort of capability, Iran, North Korea, and others who've shown little compunction to turn to cyber to achieve their objectives. The one point that I wanted to make, and I think Cynthia raised this, and it's really important, we've got to go beyond blaming the victim. For so many years, a hack occurs, an incident occurs, and you blame the company, the victim of the particular incident. We need to start putting pain and incur consequences and cost. That's the only way we're going to induce changes in behavior. And the reason I say this is important is Congressman Langevin and I had an opportunity to serve on the Solarium Commission, and we called for articulating a new strategy, a new cyber deterrence strategy. But what deters Russia may not deter Iran. What deters Iran may not deter Beijing or China. What deters China may not play in Pyongyang. So at the end of the day, you have to have a broad strategy, and then you've got to tailor that to the specific needs and requirements of the actors. So long-winded way of saying it can come in various forms, but let me just underscore cyber criminals, their capabilities 3 years ago would have been in the hands of only nation states. So a lot of the tools that they're deploying right now would in the past have required a foreign intelligence service to be able to engage. That's a game changer. So the reality is some of these ransomware operators, and they are operators, it's a network, they're pretty sophisticated. So if I'm working at an SLTT perspective, I'm going to be paying a lot of attention to the tools that nation states in the past have deployed that are now available to buy or rent in the deep web darknet, and you are seeing a big increase in terms of cyber criminal capability.
Yeah.
Thanks,
If
Frank. And sorry,
if I
yeah,
if I could just add in there again, Frank is spot on. I'll say that in our findings in the Solarium Commission, which was charged with creating overarching strategy to better protect the United States against cyber attacks of significant consequence, the three-layered strategy we had included building in resilience, so that the bad guys have to work harder to get in, and when they do get in, that they get little to nothing in terms of an advantage. You think of OPM, the Office of Personnel Management, all that vast security data that was stolen, presumably by China. Had that data been encrypted, they would have gotten basically nothing of value. So building in resilience is important. Backing up your system so that if you are a victim of a cyber ransomware attack, that you can reconstitute quickly without paying the ransom. But the other thing is, point well taken on imposing costs. Cyber on cyber. Be not just cyber on cyber, but using all assets of national power to respond. So sanctions, there's other diplomatic efforts we can do. Certainly, it might be a cyber counter issue that we would undertake, but think more broadly and not just the box of cyber on cyber response.
And that, thank you so much, Congressman, because that flowed perfectly into my next question that I want to address now to Cynthia, that you have basically answered, and so did Frank in his initial response. In terms of the challenges specific to state and local government, and the severe resource constraints that it comes to managing cybersecurity risk. Many of our state and local entities budget for cybersecurity as a very small proportion of an already modest IT budget, and particularly in local government, when it's common to have 0 or maybe 1 IT specialist on staff. So my question was going to be, what ideas do you have for addressing these resource limitations that you think have the most promise? And I already heard things like resiliency, backups, et cetera. And Cynthia, what would you chime in on that particular question?
So, obviously all of those defensive strategies are really important too. The work that's being done at that state and local level, but I also think as a force multiplier, reaching out to federal law enforcement should be really one of the number one priorities for addressing some resource limitations, because we'll kind of go, right of boom and left of boom. After a compromise, we know how to work side by side with people restoring the network. And, sometimes the people doing that are the National Guard, cyber forces. Sometimes it's DHS. Sometimes it's a private company. But, we can work alongside all of them. And we know how to work together in a way that can focus on getting systems back online, but also allow us to collect evidence and look for opportunities to hold intruders accountable. So that's kind of that post-intrusion. But even pre, as we're sitting here today, hoping you never become a victim of cyber attack, one element is that is better integrating state and local law enforcement with local FBI field offices. There's a FBI cyber task force at every local field office that state or local law enforcement can become a part of. So you become a part of that group, working alongside FBI agents, having access to the same information that FBI has access to. But you also can obtain the training available to FBI agents, and having constantly that cycle of folks through these task forces enables you to have the real-time information that you may need, as well as start building out a cybersecurity workforce even beyond the kind of local IT groups that may be working on the systems, to having your own in-house effort, able to be nimble and investigate issues as they arise.
So that again, you all are just the masters and mistresses of segue today, which I appreciate. So I wanted to continue discussing solutions, and my next question, and Cynthia, I think you just kind of addressed that, but let's start with you again really quickly. How would each of you like to see your respective institutions, Cynthia, in your case, the intelligence community, Congressman Langevin, Congress, academia, Frank, how would you like to see your respective institutions help state and local governments with cybersecurity in the years ahead? And Cynthia, if helping get these locals on board with their state task forces is the way forward, great. But if you have other suggestions, we'd love to hear that too.
Yeah, of course I have others, lots of other ways that we can work together. I think first to state the obvious, computer intrusion is a crime, and we need to start treating virtual intrusions the same way we would treat a physical break-in. And so, if a building suffered a physical attack, you're going to call someone to clean up the broken glass. You're going to change the locks. You're going to try to re-secure the building, but you're also going to call law enforcement so they can find out who did it and prevent others from becoming victims. And the same need really exists for cyber intrusions. The actor's goal really isn't just to compromise your network. It's to use that access to do something more. And that do something could be many things: steal your information, leverage your identity even as an entity to try to do follow-on operations against others you work with, get a ransom, or even do something destructive like wipe your data or destroy your systems. And at the moment of intrusion, unless you get a ransom note, you don't really know why they're doing it in the first place. And I feel like that's where the FBI's unique position as that bridge between the IC as well as law enforcement and working on scene is really helpful. It allows us to use an array of tools to pivot in multiple directions and support, whether that's NSA trying to determine the extent of a broader compromise, or working with CISON remediation. We're able to bridge that, and we're also able to collect information so we can warn others and find others responsible, and then work to hold them accountable. And I think it's really not just about what the FBI can do. It's how we can all work together to be able to do that. And we have a very long history of working with state and locals on these physical threats. And we want to make sure that we can extend that out then, into the cyber intrusion landscape. And really just one actor, one intrusion has the potential to really simultaneously impact a lot of people. So the more I think we can do that type of partnership, the more we can really get to the bottom of it, impose those consequences, but also warn each other.
Absolutely. Congressman.
Yeah, so one of my priorities for the Congress, and it will continue to be a priority for the 117th Congress, is help state, local, tribal, territorial governments modernize their IT infrastructure. We recognize that state and local governments have really accrued decades of technical debt, if you will, and we really need to be clear-eyed about the fact that we're unlikely to be able to adequately secure systems that were originally developed in the 1980s, so part of that, because it involves migrating to the cloud, and you don't have to have that way. You don't have to rely on sparse IT staff to cover all the cybersecurity bases on their own. If you able to migrate, whether you have updated systems that are easier to secure, but then migrating data to the cloud, and engaging in hopefully shared services that are going to help both local governments as well as state, tribal, territorial, that's going to go a long way to better securing your IT infrastructure. I know that the federal government can play a role there, but I will say that still states are going to have to step up and do more on their own. It can't be that they relying just on the federal government. The federal government isn't going to be the one coming, the cavalry coming over the hill with everything that states are going to need. And I think states can and really should do more from coast to coast. I think it's a universal challenge for states, but one that really they need to do more. But the federal government should help, I believe, with modernize the IT infrastructure, and again, helping migrate data to the cloud.
Absolutely. And Frank, what can academia do to help?
So I'm going to get to that in a second, promise. But one thought on states is, so I led an effort for DHS that was looking at funding for state, local around cyber. And sadly, only about 4% of the Homeland Security grant funds at the time were going towards cybersecurity. So we do need to change that calculation a little bit to ensure that there's a greater percentage of the funds to the HSGP in particular. But I also think we need to get smart about pooling resources. And we were looking at sort of EMACs and other sort of responsibilities where emergency managers would pool resources to fight fires, to respond to natural disasters. So there are some other areas that I think if we could regionalize, and this may sound Pollyannish, but also as much as we can pool. And here's the other thing on IT spend, best practice is about 12 to 15% of your IT spend should go towards cybersecurity. So this isn't a free pass either. At the end of the day, I think that when you're looking at modernization and IT infrastructure costs, you should start including cybersecurity as a baked-in cost and requirement to that. So just a couple thoughts there. And another is private sector. At the end of the day, there's been so much talk about public-private sector partnerships. Time to translate the nouns into verbs, and I think there are opportunities to actually have joint planning, joint operations, and Cynthia, don't shoot me, but I think that there's an opportunity for intelligence requirement setting that could actually start meeting the owner and operator's needs and requirements in the cyber domain. That's a much longer conversation, so I'll leave it at that. And I've never had an unspoken thought, but because I do stand where I sit, universities have a responsibility in the cyber environment, not only an opportunity, but a responsibility. The workforce. Ultimately, the greatest deficit we're all dealing with right now are the talent. We don't have enough, and we don't necessarily know what we need. In other words, it's really incumbent upon state and local leaders. It's really incumbent upon private sector leaders. It's really incumbent upon the feds to help drive what those real education requirements and needs are for that next generation of cyber warriors and cyber defenders. And I just wanted to say that Congressman Langevin's been a Paul Revere and a George Washington combined on cyber issues legislatively. So you've got the right guy on this one right now.
Well, I think we've been very lucky to have all of you. So I want to end on a positive note, and I know we're running really late in the day for questions, and so I want to try to address at least one or two if we have time, but I'm hoping you all would be willing to lightning round with me really quick, just to quickly talk about one promising practice, program, or partnership that you've seen in state or local government cybersecurity that you'd like to see others adopt. And Congressman, let's start with you.
Yeah. So first of all, I thanks for the opportunity to be on the panel today, and I'll say that the 20 as a former Secretary of State, I have great respect for and appreciate the hard work of Secretaries of State and local elections officials. So I give a lot of credit for how everyone doubled down to make sure that this was the most secure election in U.S. history. Again, according to Chris Krebs, the former director at CISA DHS, and in large part, this was really due to the outstanding work of, again, our Secretaries of State and our local election officials, but it was also due to the outstanding work of CISA, the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency at DHS, that really reached out to and worked closely with state and local governments under the leadership of Chris Krebs. They worked diligently for over 4 years to really build that relationship with state and local governments and to really assist them where needed. And when asked, bringing in they're helping to bring their systems in line with cybersecurity standards and testing to identify vulnerabilities early, and then working with them to harden those systems well in time before the election. So I think that's one good news story that everyone really should be touting, and I'm really pleased to share.
Totally agree with that, Congressman. Frank, what's your one promising practice, program, etc.?
Again, I'm going to cheat. I've got two. So first one is very parochial, and Alabama stood up the Alabama School for Cyber Technology and Engineering. This is a magnet school, so university might be too late. So they're trying to pull a page from Israel, Estonia, and other countries that are teaching cyber at a very young age. So from a workforce standpoint, the ASCTE is a phenomenal effort. And just from the Secretaries of State, I think building on the elections ISAC and the MS ISAC and some of the work there, these are efforts that are worth continuing, doubling down on and moving forward.
Great. And last but not least, Cynthia.
So I'm going to also have two here, but they're both surrounded by the elections. And I just, first appreciate being on this panel because I appreciate being able to talk to everyone here about some things that are beyond elections. But I do think that the work that we've all been able to do together in the last few years has a lot of great ways forward. The two ones that really hit home for me are how the FBI started, I think, shaping its investigations more with the eye towards unclassified attribution to try to, help get the message out as broadly as possible about who was doing the activity as a means to be able to provide that assistance as needed. So that's number one. And number two is the policy that FBI and CISA started at the beginning of 2020, where we told Secretaries of State if there were targeting or intrusions at the local level for election systems. For that one, I'd like to explore the legal basis, whether we could expand that out a little more, because I think that provided the accountability that we're all looking for. It provided the awareness throughout the state that's needed to be able to really harness better resources and address some of the challenges we face.
Well, thank you all so much, Lindsay. I'm gonna see whether we want to try to, honor everyone, get out of here quickly, or see if we have time for a couple questions. What do you think, Lindsay?
Yeah, we're at time, but so as people have to drop off, that's fine. I'll go ahead. We have one question from Secretary Ardoin in the panel, and if other secretaries have quick questions, feel free to let me know, and we'll try to get to them. His question was addressed to Cynthia, but others can feel free to weigh in on it. So Louisiana has enacted a registration requirement and ransomware reporting requirement for managed service providers and managed security service providers. And the reason was to make sure that their partners in cybersecurity can communicate when major attacks occur through MSPs. What sort of best practices could be promoted for local governments to ask about when hiring a managed service provider?
So I can give you a couple ideas, and it's actually something I'd like to also take back and get a fuller answer and share out afterwards if that works for everyone. But I think when you're asking managed service provider, how you're going to be handling a lot of the information. The first issue is, what you're signing for services and whether you're able to place into that any of the certain requirements that you actually want to have, present in that. We're working towards trying to develop contracts and the types of language we want to be more specific for just the supply chain for FBI overall, not just managed service providers. And I think really being able to contractually obligate the services that you work with, if possible, is a great way forward. But I think the simple things, who has admin access to your systems? Do you have two-factor authentication? How can you move laterally throughout a network? I think that it's really the basics that we would ask them. And like I said, I'll give those that a more detailed response and give it and send it over to Lindsay, or send it over to you so you can send it out. But I think being able, you can ask all the questions you want, and being able to, I think, really get folks to comply probably requires a little bit extra effort on our ends.
Congressman Langevin, any thoughts on this?
Well, I think shared services are a great idea. We can't expect state and locals to defend against nation states, for example, attacks and such. So I think wherever we can have shared services and allow, say, cloud security companies to do what they do best in securing data and things, I think that's something that we should look at and migrate toward. So just to kind of add a little bit to what Cynthia had to say.
Thank you. Frank, any last thoughts?
Nothing other to say that in addition to our traditional, if you think of the X and Y axis where we have critical infrastructure sectors, there are also critical functions and national critical functions. And there are some, while I'm a big proponent of shared services, we also need to ensure that there are no potential single point failures in all of that. So that is a similar sort of question. I think due diligence and know your partner, people ought to be asking of their MSP. So, but I don't want to go too far down that path. That's a long conversation. And I've never had an unspoken thought, as you can tell.
All right.
That's why we love you, Frank.
No, and you've all been so amazing. And I'm really sorry because I do know that we had some other folks out there that have questions. I know that if you get them over to Lindsay, she can get some answers from our panelists and circulate them back out if they are willing to give of their time after this. But I really just want to thank you all so much for being here today, for providing us a very enriching and informative discussion. All of your time is very valuable, and we really just appreciate you coming and sharing your thoughts and insights with us. And I want to thank, of course, our secretaries and staff and everybody else who attended today and joined me in gleaning some of this valuable insight from our panelists. So thank you all very much. Thank you all for attending today's NASS conference. And this is our last event today. So I wish you all a lovely evening, and I will see many of you tomorrow at our general session at 12 o'clock Eastern. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you all.